Good morning. My name is Kathy and I live in the parish of Binstead, and welcome to today's thought. This reading this morning is taken from the Gospel of Mark, so let us read it together. Mark chapter 16, starting at verse 1. It is titled, Jesus is Risen. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, "Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." Trembling and bewildered, the woman went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. We view the Easter events with the benefit of hindsight and the knowledge of Jesus' resurrection. The hope, mercy, and way of salvation we have been shown through what Jesus did for us on the cross. For us, it is indeed good news. But let us cast our minds back and try to put ourselves into the shoes of those women that first Easter Sunday. After the horror and the crowds and the noise of the day of Jesus' crucifixion, this chapter of Mark's Gospel starts quietly. In the preceding chapter of our reading this morning, we read that these women were at the crucifixion scene, hardly noticed, watching from a distance, watching the terrible death of the man they had followed and supported. A terrible end of all their hopes leaves them in disarray. Because of the timing of Jesus' death on the day of preparation, and so close to the start of Sabbath at sunset, something had to be done quickly. If nobody took charge of Jesus' body, then it probably would have been thrown into a common grave. Joseph of Arimathea had boldly requested to be allowed to take the body of Jesus. Pilate, although surprised, had agreed after making sure Jesus had died. Joseph bought a linen shroud, took the body down, wrapped it in a cloth, and laid it in a tomb cut out of the rock. A stone was rolled against the door of this tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, mother of Jesus, saw where he was buried. Burials at that time were in two stages. Immediately after the death, a body was wrapped up and ideally covered in spices to offset the smell of decomposition. It was then placed on a shelf or a niche, usually about waist height, within a cave. Other bodies would, in due course, be laid on the other shelves in the same cave. Within a year or two, the flesh would have decomposed, and the bodies would be gathered and placed in an ossuary, which would be stored for its final rest on another shelf, quite probably in the same tomb. Our reading today picks up the story as the Sabbath ended. Mary Magdalene, Mary, mother of Jesus, and Salome bought spices so they could anoint Jesus' body. But it would have already been dark, so they had to wait till the next morning. Very early on Sunday, the first day of the week, they set off for the tomb. Their plan was not altogether formed, as they weren't sure how they were going to move the very large stone from the doorway, but their need to tend to Jesus' body was of paramount urgency. What we can be sure of is that they were not going in order to witness Jesus' resurrection. They had no idea that any such thing was even thinkable. They were going to complete the first burial. This was a sad but necessary task, one but necessary both for reverence sake and a practical one to lessen the smell. They got the shock of their lives. The stone was already rolled away. A young man in white sat where Jesus' body had been and calmly explained to them that Jesus had been raised from the dead and would see them again in Galilee. Not surprisingly, they couldn't take it all in. They were not afraid of death or of handling a dead body of the beloved Master, but they were afraid of the empty tomb and the words of astonishing hope that had been spoken to them. They were to go with a message for the disciples. The woman's reaction is, however, to ignore what they have been told. They're seized with terror and amazement. They flee and quite naturally rushed off home, scared out of their wits. They were in shock. They must have passed several people on the way, but they didn't say a word. They say nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. There is an almost ironical reversal of situations earlier in this gospel. Earlier, people were regularly told to stay silent about Jesus, and they often disobeyed. Here, the women are told to speak out openly, yet they are silent. Why should hope and promise be harder to bear than death and despair? Why is it so hard to believe, now as then, that life and transformation and joy are as much a part of the world and its maker as death and disintegration? The Christian hope of new life is not based on a kind of blind and meaningless optimism. Rather, our hope is scarred with the wounds of the cross, and it is only hope because of that. So when the angel speaks words of life and joy to us, let us believe them and go and tell them, make them real and credible to others. Show them the scars that are the source of life, not the end. What we must not do is stay silent. Thank you for joining me. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.